Debunking the myth of learning styles. The idea that teachers should be assessing and teaching to different student learning styles has been around for over 40 years. The popularity of this theory has led to many online and published learning style surveys, focused professional development in books on differentiated instruction for learning style, and a false assumption that teaching to learning style is a research-backed best practice. Essentially, the learning styles concept asserts that people have a specific learning preference and that instruction should be tailored according to that preference in order to enhance learning outcomes. The most popular learning style differentiation is between visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learners. Infidelity to the idea of learning styles, a teacher would need to assess each student, or lead them in a self-assessment, to determine their dominant learning style. Then, each student would be instructed and given learning opportunities in his or her own learning style or modality. An example of this might be a kindergarten class studying the autumn season. Auditory learners might listen to stories about the fall. Visual learners could study photographs and drawings of fall activities. Kinesthetic learners perhaps would get to put on fall clothing and handle pumpkins and kites. If the teacher has provided learning opportunities to students in their dominant learning style, each student should show academic gains greater than if they had been taught in a different modality. Unfortunately, years of research does not back up the claims of the learning styles theory. A very comprehensive review of data by Cavelli and Fornes in 1987 analyzed 39 studies using meta-analysis and determined that tailoring instruction to students' modality had no educational effect. Another more recent study by Hussman and O'Loughlin at Indiana University tested the idea that perhaps learning style had more of an impact when used for focused study outside of class. 400 students took a learning styles evaluation and then reported their study techniques. The students' exam results were assessed in relation to if their study methods matched up with their learning styles. Most students did not choose to study according to their learning style, and of those who did, their scores showed no advantage. So, if there's little evidence to support the learning styles myth, why is it so popular? Well, teachers truly are interested in providing an impactful, differentiated learning experience for each of our students. It's clear that each person has a unique set of experiences, interests, talents, and abilities in different areas. Teachers genuinely want to provide for each student and to be able to demonstrate to parents that we're tailoring a learning experience to the needs of each child. Also, it's important to recognize just how pervasive this myth is in education and society at large, despite peer-reviewed data that doesn't back up its claims. If you search Google for learning styles, you'll find 5.9 million links. Students do have marked preferences in learning modalities and are often very willing to share those preferences with their teachers, especially as the idea of learning styles is so often used with students. Finally, as with many myths, it is based in some truth, though completely misapplied. Students do have differing strength and levels of learning ability when it comes to the areas of visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning. There's a marked difference in those having ability in an area and benefiting academically through explicit instruction utilizing only that modality. Learners with auditory ability may be able to pick out distinct phonemes in a foreign language, Spanish for example, which could help in pronunciation. After hearing it said, a Spanish student may be able to correctly pronounce el vestido as opposed to el vestido. A student who has a visual learning ability may be able to correctly distinguish the shape of the state of Texas from other state shapes. A student with kinesthetic ability may be able to shoot a three-pointer in basketball better than his or her peers. This is all wonderful, but here's the first breakdown in the theory. Teachers in the classroom are not primarily teaching or assessing for auditory or visual memory. They want to know if the student has processed the information for meaning that can be recalled. Let's return to our Spanish student for a moment. The correct pronunciation of el vestido is great, but likely is of little use if the student does not process the information of the word's meaning, the dress. A student's ability to distinguish the state of Texas's shape likewise could be helpful, but rarely would be assessed in isolation. The visual alone does not assist the student in knowing that the capital of Texas is Austin, for example, and that the state was annexed into the Union in 1845. Finally, even in our sports example, our young athlete may be able to shoot, but being able to play smart and determine when to shoot and when to pass during a game is really what counts. So what's the harm in students being instructed in the modality for which they have preference and maybe even demonstrate ability? The harm comes in that when students are identified as having a particular learning type, and an instruction is tailored to that student with that modality as the only focus, the student loses out on the best instruction and learning experiences possible to pull out and store meaning. A student may also fall into the trap of learned helplessness. They could grab onto the idea that they're an auditory learner, for example, and decide from the onset of a lesson that graphic organizers or charts are beyond them, or that a study of paintings from the Renaissance is not helpful to them in their study of history. This couldn't be further from the truth, but the notion can certainly be self-defeating if the student has internalized the myth of learning styles. Despite different preferences and abilities, science shows us that we all actually benefit from the same strategies in teaching and learning. When choosing how to present a lesson, orally, visually, or kinesthetically, a teacher is best served not by considering the students, but by considering the content. Depending on what the lesson's objective is, so what type of meaning the student should be getting out of the lesson, the teacher should decide how best to present the learning experience. An example is that if a teacher wants a student to understand the attributes of a rectangular prism, she would be best served by presenting the information visually, as opposed to just trying to describe it orally. Teaching meter and poetry will be presented in an auditory modality. Despite these examples, most learners and lessons benefit from dual coding, a learning strategy of combining multiple modalities into one lesson. If a lesson can be presented with auditory and visual representation, the memory is more sticky, and the connections usually more meaningful. The memory is encoded with more contextual clues to aid in recall. The deeper the meaning of a memory, the more ways that it's represented and stored, and the more times that a concept is approached, the higher the retrieval strength will be. So studies and research have shown us that there's little to no evidence that teaching to learning styles positively impacts learning. There are many other popular tricks and study techniques that also have been shown to be equally unhelpful in education. The good news is that other studies point us toward strategies that have reliably demonstrated great impact on our ability to learn and problem solve. So what does work? Distributed learning is a great tool for learning and retention of information. Even when having a set amount of time to study, if that time is broken up into chunks and distributed over days, learning sticks. Another proven technique is interleaved practice. When a skill is taught and practiced in isolation from others in the same subject, math for example, there's not much critical thought in the process of determining what to do. When different skills, multiplication, division, and addition word problems for example, are mixed together, the student is forced to more critically assess the problems and learning sticks. This effect is not obvious in practice, but becomes apparent in tests when the skill has to be applied to new problems. Another valuable strategy to make learning stick is testing. Teachers bemoan that we have to teach to the test, but the good news is that testing can actually teach. This valuable testing is not the cumulative assessment, but rather a low-stakes practice. This could be as simple as adding a pretest to the beginning of a unit to prime the student for learning, or it could be a parent or friend orally quizzing the student the night before a test and then providing immediate feedback as to what was correct and not. As teachers, we have the awesome responsibility to guide our students and present learning opportunities in the most effective ways that we can. The brain is a powerful organ that is constantly making memories and forgetting them in order to make more. As teachers, we guide our students not only to stick to learning styles that are comfortable to them, but to push them to utilize different modalities to make meaning and grow as lifelong learners.